So here we have the Victorian curriculum. And if we want to go to the science curriculum, we go into the tab of science. And here on the left-hand side, we see that it's broken up into these rationale and aims, the structure, learning in science, scope and sequence, and so on. So have a read of the rationale and aims to understand the context of VCAA in terms of positioning science within the Victorian curriculum. And in terms of just looking at science, we have these additional substrands under two specific strands of science. Okay, so we have one strand of science called science understanding, and under that we have this term called science as a human endeavour, biological sciences, chemical sciences, earth and space sciences, and physical sciences. And we also have another strand called the science inquiry skills. Now, this is not to be confused with inquiry-based learning. They are two separate things. Inquiry skills are talking about questioning and predicting, planning and conducting, recording and processing, analysing and evaluating, and communicating. So you need to think about how you're going to incorporate these science inquiry skills into your lessons so that you are developing these skills in your students. And ideally, you are connecting them to this science understanding. So very rarely do we teach them in isolation, but coupled with this science understanding. These science inquiry skills, we'll look at them in a moment when we go into the curriculum, but these are organised to be a scaffold towards heading towards VCE, the sciences in VCE. And when you come up to do the next unit, you will notice that these science skills develop in complexity and build upon what has already been done in 7 to 10 in the VCE years. And you can see clear comparison and clear growth and clear accumulation of learning in terms of developing these particular science inquiry skills, which we know are so important. So let's go into the specific curriculum, and we'll focus on Year 7 here. So we have, as I mentioned, the science understanding. So science understanding is headed with science as a human endeavour. So thinking about, the real world context of science and why it's so important to be thinking of problems, addressing how you're going to find a solution, for an example, and how that's done basically in industry and how it's been done in the past as well. So if we have a look at some of these, we've got science and technology contribute to finding solutions to a range of contemporary issues. And if I click on the elaborator, it gives you some really specific connections to how you incorporate that into your classroom. For an example, this one here, discussing ethical issues that arise from organ transplantation. So you could basically connect that to when you're talking about the systems of organs here. Okay, so that was a clear connection between this content descriptor in biological sciences and this one in science understanding. So you're always thinking about how you can connect science understanding with these other sciences that we know more typically. I would like to bring your attention also to the fact that these are coupled in Year 7 and 8. So we have some flexibility in terms of what is presented in Year 11 and Year 8, and again in 9 and 10. But when you're designing units and when you're planning your teaching, you should be thinking about how these descriptors build upon each other. So, what needs to come first in understanding to be, in order to understand something else, for an example. So if I give you a specific example, what could all right, let's, just because we're on biological sciences, look at this one. Cells are the basic units of living things and have specialized structure and functions. So if we think about cells as the basic units of living things, to me that sounds like it probably will come in year 7, because we're building upon, an understanding from the basic into, a more complex organism. For an example here, that might come in year 8 potentially, because it builds upon the cells. Okay, so that's a very simplistic example, but you can see here how some of the content descriptors build upon, with the intention that one would be in year 8 and one would be in year 7, to have a progression of learning. And the same goes for year 9 and 10 as well. So there we have the content descriptors and their elaborations. If you click on the additional details, we have the strands listed here. And of course, we have these science inquiry skills listed as another strand as well. So take time to read through each of these and understand and even consider what you would do to expose your students to these type of skills so that they are developing those skills, but also how are you explicitly going to teach each of these skills? What learning experiences will aid, in the understanding of each of these content descriptors. So if we go up, we also have the scope and sequence. So if I click on scope and sequence, that gives you an overview of science levels 7 to 10. And I've already downloaded that one, and it looks like here. So we've got the main content descriptors in the scope and sequence, outlining what happens in year 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. And obviously you would go back to where we were in the curriculum to find the elaborations. Okay. And down the bottom, it has a overview of, at the end of year 8, what should your student or students understand and be able to do, and the same for year 9 and 10. So make sure you have a read of those as well, because you will be reporting to those. So that gives you a overview of the science curriculum in terms of the structure, the 2 strands, science understanding, science inquiry skills, and the sub-strands as well.